acknowledge that wherever we are this afternoon, we are gathered on Aboriginal land and sovereignty was never ceded. I'm working from our office in Talawalada on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to Gadigal people, to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations people, artists and creatives joining us on the webinar today. So we do invite you to please use the chat function to tell us which Aboriginal lands you are joining from us at this moment. So say hello, don't be shy in the chat. These webinars are designed for you and to lead you to information that you might need, so don't hesitate to write up your questions in the chat. So thank you for joining us on your lunchtime for this webinar about boards and governance and board basics for your organisation. This is the second episode in our series of Create Exchange, where we focus on arts and culture business, planning and governance basics for the small to medium sector. My name is Beck Dean and I'm a Senior Manager at Create New South Wales in Arts Strategy and Engagement. I'm a middle-aged white woman with grey hair and glasses. Also joining us from Create New South Wales is Yanni Clark and Ros Richardson, and Yanni will be helping us with some links and with questions from you as we go. So we wanted to run this particular webinar as there's been a lot of discourse in Australia recently about the role of volunteer boards in arts and cultural organisations and the important work that they do. Last year, Creative Australia launched the Governance Hub on its website to support organisations with getting their governance structures right. So it's fantastic that we have Adam McGowan here today, Director Industry Development for Creative Australia, to take us through this and other resources. And we also have Vicki Middleton of Middleton Arts, who's an independent arts director, consultant, strategist and a friend to many an arts organisation in New South Wales, supporting them with strategic planning, organisational review processes and fundraising, among many other things. And she'll be providing us with her first-hand perspectives on boards and governance. Before I hand over to them, I've just put a couple of slides together with a bit of contextualising information. So just the question, when do you need governance? When do you need a board? So if you decide to start, or if you are within a not-for-profit or arts and cultural organisation in New South Wales, you establish governance in a couple of common ways. So you establish your organisation either as an incorporated association, and these are just two common ones, and that's governed by New South Wales legislation, the Associations Incorporation Act of 2009, and the regulator for that is the New South Wales Fair Trading. You might also set up as a company limited by guarantee, which is covered in the Corporations Act of 2001, which is a federal legislation, and you might be engaging with the Australian Securities Investments Commission and as a not-for-profit with the Australian Charity and Not-for-Profits Commission. So for both the establishment of an incorporated association or a company limited by guarantee, you're required to do a certain number of things. So you need to adopt a constitution, you need to appoint a board or committee, you need to meet certain compliance obligations, and then the board itself might need to meet a few basic requirements under the legislation. So in terms of the Associations Act, the required office bearers would be chair or a president, a public officer or secretary, and a treasurer. And for a company limited by guarantee, you need to have 3 directors and a company secretary who could also be one of the directors. So they're your sort of basic minimums for a board. And other things that you might want to consider when you are building your board is, you know, the capacity of your organisation and what you can manage in terms of managing, you know, volunteer board members. What it says in your constitution about board member numbers, or if you have a board charter that connects to the constitution. You need your board to understand how much time and energy commitment they're requiring. You need to think about what your organisation needs from a governance structure. You might cover some basic legal stuff and financial stuff, but do you need support in other areas? You need to make sure that, as you're going through the process of your work, that the vision that you've established for yourselves is supported by the board. And then you also need to be thinking about what the makeup of the board actually looks like. What kinds of expertise or demographies do they bring to your organisation that it might need? And so I guess without further ado, I'm going to hand over to someone who's much more expert in this, Adam McGowan. Adam, it'd be great if you could take us through the work that Creative Australia has been doing to create resources for organisations across Australia.
Thanks so much, Beck, and hi, everybody. It's really great to be with you today to chat all things governance. As Beck mentioned, my name's Adam McGowan. I'm the Director of Industry Development at Creative Australia, and I too just want to acknowledge I'm also joining from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation today, and pay my respect to elders past and present, recognising that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. And very specifically, I'm joining from a place called Pirama in the local language, but more commonly today known as Pyrmont, where the Creative Australia offices are located. I use he, him pronouns. I am a Caucasian male. I've got dark brown hair, matching dark brown eyes. I'm wearing glasses and a kind of pink and white check shirt, and I've got a green background behind me. And just very quickly to kind of contextualize the work that my team delivers and where we sit within Creative Australia, just if you're unfamiliar, my team sits within the Development and Partnerships division, and we lead on a range of training and capability and professional development opportunities for creative professionals. And over the last few years, our work's crossed kind of three core priority areas, and that's been around digital development and experimentation and innovation, linked with our digital culture strategy, which wrapped up last year. A long kind of period of investment and work around leadership development and capability, and that's been a kind of 15-year investment for Creative Australia, and most recently via the Creative Leadership Program, and very much linked to a conversation around leadership has been our investment in governance, kind of capability and training. And today I'm really excited to share some more information with you about the Governance Hub, which Beck has referenced already, but also some other very useful resources as you're thinking about your governance journey. And in addition to the hub, which I'll talk about, we've also been supporting a range of individuals and organisations over the last few years to access formal governance training, and that's included some work with the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and also a recent opportunity for some more self-directed training and development. So I'm really conscious that today we'll be joined by individuals who are already leading not-for-profit organisations, maybe some company directors, aspiring company directors, but also very possibly some individuals who are kind of curious in this space. So I'm gonna, if we want to just jump to the next slide, I'm going to kick off just with some kind of really basic information and frame my section today around these three kind of core areas, and it's going to be pretty top line, but I'll be popping a bunch of links in the chat as we go, which will hopefully direct you to some other really relevant and useful information. And noting that there is a lot of information out there, and that's both a good thing, but it can also be really challenging in terms of how you might navigate your way through those different resources resources and find what's kind of useful and relevant to your organisation and context. So I'm going to try to keep it to 15 minutes today, and then we'll have some time at the end if you've got any questions. So the first thing to just chat around is the choice, really, to set up a company. And of course, a company is one type of business structure. And that is where the business is a legally separate entity to its owners. And as Beck mentioned in her introduction, a lot of not-for-profit companies in the arts and cultural sector are companies limited by guarantee. And just to define that as well, for those who might be unfamiliar, essentially that means where directors, members have their liability rather is limited to a predetermined amount that they would guarantee to contribute where the company is wound up. And that amount is importantly stated in the company's constitution, and it's usually not a very significant financial obligation. But it is important to consider if setting up a company is the best option for your kind of business operations. And just noting, of course, the other kind of legal structures that are available. And that includes, as Beck mentioned earlier, incorporated associations, which are state-based, not-for-profit organisations. There's cooperative models, and then, of course, as many in the arts and creative sector conduct their business as independent contractors or sole traders. So if you're wanting to kind of think about setting up a company, it's really important to get legal advice. And though the good news is that ahead of kind of getting any kind of formal legal advice, there is lots of information, general information that can guide you on the kind of process, some of the benefits, but also the cost considerations and different reporting requirements. Noting that a company is a more complex business structure to both start and to run. But of course, some of the benefits when you're thinking about the option of setting up as a company, as I mentioned before, it is a separate legal entity. So personal assets for members or directors are protected. There are some benefits, of course, in terms of company tax rates and taxation rules potentially. And a company structure might offer you greater kind of flexibility and an opportunity for faster kind of business growth. If we can just jump to the next slide. Related to this, I just wanted to point you towards the Creative Workplaces website as a first resource. And some of you might be familiar with Creative Workplaces. It was an action under Revive, the federal government's national cultural policy, to establish an entity within Creative Australia that was focused very specifically on supporting fair, safe and respectful workplaces for artists, arts workers and arts organisations in Australia. And there's really useful information, and I'll direct to a couple of specific links in the chat around setting up a company and registering a business. So both information on the Creative Workplaces site itself, but also pointing out to really great resources available through business.gov.au and some of the other kind of reporting organisations that you might be interfacing with, as Beck mentioned before, when you set up a company. The other really important information that's contained on the Creative Workplaces site that's relevant to company directors and boards is a lot of information around workplace safety and work health and safety legislation. And of course, this is a very relevant area to company directors. And it's important in terms of their, and I'm going to use the kind of legal language here because this is something that is really relevant to any company director, as they are required to exercise their powers and discharge their duties with the level of care, It's a really important word. And diligence, that a reasonable person would exercise in similar circumstances. So, as we're talking about particularly things like work health and safety and legislation now around positive obligation, the board has a role in intersecting with that in terms of policy development and supporting leadership and the organisation and management team in delivering and developing those procedures relevant to policy. So just excuse me for a moment while I do a little copy and paste job, but popping in the chat now what might hopefully be some useful resources for you. Oh, actually, I can't copy into the chat. Right. All right. We'll maybe share those a little later. The next detail that I wanted to touch on was the company constitution. And as Beck noted, all incorporated not-for-profit organisations must, by law, have a constitution. And you might have also heard this referred to as an organisation's or a company's rules or their articles of incorporation or articles of association. The good news is, much like resources and information to kind of guide establishment of a company, there's really great resources available, particularly through the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, that support the development of a company constitution. The ACNC has a really fantastic template and also an accompanying guide that can give you a really good basis and starting point in terms of the development of your constitution. The important thing to note, though, of course, is that your constitution needs to be really fit for purpose for your type of business activity. So the crucial thing with any templates or guides that you might be drawing on online or through other sources is that you really interrogate them and their relevance to your organisation and its kind of mission and values and also strategy, intended kind of strategy. So we'll share those links later. But the next, if we can just jump to the next slide, I wanted to spend a moment just to talk about Creative Australia's Governance Hub. And I'll share my screen momentarily, but just giving you a chance if you want to use the QR code there to link you through to the hub. But this is a free resource that we have developed for arts and cultural organisations to be able to access information, resources, some relevant guides and templates, but also importantly, critical conversations around contemporary arts governance, and also some case studies. So excuse me for a moment while I jump and share my screen. So hopefully you're seeing there the landing page for the Governance Hub. As was mentioned, this launched about a year ago, and this will be an evolving resource hub for the arts and cultural sector. We'll be adding to it over time and really being responsive to some of the trends and key kind of conversations in contemporary arts governance. Noting, of course, that the governance space changes and changes constantly. And in a lot of ways, there are increasing responsibilities for those who wish to take on the role of a company director. And some of that I might touch on towards the end of my session. But you can see here, there's a section titled Downloads, and this includes a series of guides and then associated templates that can support some areas of specific policy development. Now, there are a lot of areas potentially to develop and consider kind of policy in a governance context, and they will be very relevant and specific to each organisation. The ones that we've included on our own hub are designed very much to perhaps fill some gaps, but also areas that we ascertained through a needs analysis that were high priority for arts and cultural organisations. So you can see there are specific areas of priority around data and cybersecurity, obviously an increasing consideration for all organisations, processes around developing and considering a fit-for-purpose skill and diversity matrix, and I know Vicki's going to talk a little bit more about that. Also thinking about areas and emergent areas that are really important conversations within our sector around climate change and how your organisation might be thinking about that from a governance perspective. But also importantly, the process of induction, recruitment, things like succession planning, both for directors, but also thinking about the board's important role in succession planning for the CEO and leadership, which I think is a conversation that is really important to have in the arts and cultural sector. So I'm just going to click here on this first template, just to give you a little bit of a sense of how they're orientated, and I'll zoom in there. So it obviously gives some explanatory kind of information in this one. This supports general kind of guidance around both developing and reviewing policy. And I would just stress that point, and it's a really important one, that the board must always be re-looking at policy and ensuring that it is really relevant to the times and is responsive to how that organisation might be evolving or developing, perhaps new areas of operation that are requiring a different lens across that policy development. It should never be a case of sort of set and forget. A policy needs to be a really living document, and one that the leadership or management team can then adequately and thoughtfully kind of respond to in developing particular kind of procedures in terms of the organisation's operations. So it takes through kind of set stages here around how you kind of make these documents fit for purpose, the monitoring and enforcement role that that the board has in developing policy, and then importantly some really essential policies and procedures that a board would would want to develop as a first kind of principle. So one that was mentioned before, obviously, a board charter, a board code of conduct, conflict of interest policy is obviously very important in terms of a board discharging its duties. And then areas around, importantly, related to finance and risk and strategy, key areas of priority for a board. And then there are a range of other, and these link to the individual policy documents, specific kind of areas of policy development that arts and cultural boards might want to consider. Now, this space, as I mentioned, is overwhelmed with information. So we've tried really purposefully with these resources to point out where there's other really good information available to you. And I'd stress the point to engage with as many different templates and potential example policies. I know lots of organisations very actively and supportively share some of their kind of policy information, and I think that that's a really good process because the more that you can draw on to really shape policy in a way that's really aligned to your culture and values as an organisation is critical. So I'll just come back to the main hub landing page. So these are the current kind of guides and templates. We'll be developing a few more, but increasingly we'll also help to point out to really great examples, say through the ACNC, through the ACNC, but also the Governance Institute of Australia. We also, as part of the hub, partnered with Diversity Arts Australia around a series of key contemporary conversations around arts governance. And you'll notice as you're looking through the hub, there are a few sort of priority areas that we think are really important. And one of those is around diversity in governance in the arts and cultural sector. That is still an area for improvement for our sector. And so we provide one of our kind of focus conversations with Diversity Arts Australia is around that, as are a number of the case studies that are on this hub. The climate kind of conversation and how that relates to governance, I think is also an increasingly important one for our sector, as is considerations around succession planning. So you'll see those as key kind of focus areas across both policy, conversation, and case studies. And what we've attempted to do with the case studies is profile some really excellent practice in these areas, and both to give you a bit of a taste about how other organisations work and think in this space, but also some interesting kind of takeaways that you might be able to apply in your own kind of context. So that is the fastest little whip around of Governance Hub. But one other key document here that I will just note is this link, which is Governance Essentials for Arts Organisations. And that gives you a really good framing for how you might think about the governance and your governance culture, and as well as some interesting research. The last thing I would just note is that another really great free resource that's available via the Australian Institute of Company Directors is an annual spotlight around not-for-profit governance more broadly, so across the charity sector. And it provides some really excellent benchmarking around the key kind of trends and conversations and important considerations that charity-based companies are kind of considering or grappling with. And it gives some good insights to where those trends are emerging across the different parts of the charity sector. So that's on the Australian Institute of Company Directors site. And the last thing I'd note, which is just more of a sort of provocation and something to think about, mandatory climate reporting is now coming into place. For the most part, that will not be a requirement for a lot of not-for-profit organisations in their own reporting obligations. However, there will be some trickle-down kind of impacts, and particularly where it relates to smaller organisations who might be intersecting with those larger entities who will have reporting obligations around their kind of climate actions. And that may necessitate them receiving some information from the other organisations that they're interfacing with. So just be really conscious of that. We'll share a really great little one-pager on the new mandatory climate reporting detail fact sheet as well. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. So if you do have any questions for Adam about the Governance Hub on Creative Australia's website, please drop them into the chat. I just thought I would ask you a question about your experiences following launching this hub, and whether you have any insights into the sort of most common issues that the sector are sort of engaging with around governance.
Yeah, great question, Beck. I mean, interestingly, what we've seen is that across the different resources and templates, there's been a pretty even rate of download, which is great. So clearly each of those resources are resonating in different ways for organizations. I would say definitely the climate kind of conversation and how that's increasingly emerging as a priority for many boards in terms of the kinds of sustainability measures and responses that they're contemplating and considering, but also how climate change might be changing the orientation of particular types of businesses is looming large. And we have done some work in this space at a climate leadership level with some specific investments. And that will be an ongoing kind of focus for Creative Australia, noting, of course, too, that very recently Creative Climate was launched, which is one of the delivery organisations funded by Creative Australia to really support both elevating great work that's happening in the sector, and that is very much and very often artist-led, but importantly thinking about the larger kind of skill and literacy and capability work that that the sector is seeking and wanting to kind of think about ways that that collective action can be kind of empowered and encouraged. So if you haven't sort of spotted or noticed Creative Climate, seek out their website's newly launched, and they'll be helping in that kind of leadership kind of conversation around climate action as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's really fantastic the resources that you've pulled together to support policy development within organisations. There's quite often, my experience on boards over the past 25 years is often policy development comes after a stumble, because we've the organisation might have found itself in a pickle around something to do with HR or to do with engaging with community, and so policies get developed following that. So it's really fantastic to have a resource that will actually allow you to think about organisations to think about the kinds of policies that they might need to be fit for purpose for their organisation and the interactions that they have in doing work and supporting their organisation to do work. There is a question from Madhu about whether you have any insight into the increase in organisations wanting to include young people onto arts governance or arts boards and any resources around that. I think also noting that our minister has changed the legislation regarding the governance of our cultural institutions in New South Wales to mandate young people being engaged on those boards.
Yeah, and a really important question. And I would say, as I was talking about the need to kind of increase diversity on boards, certainly the presence and prevalence of younger people on boards in the arts and cultural sector is kind of an area that that we could work on more, frankly. And as part of our kind of training, access to kind of training and development, we've had a priority on individuals who we know are underrepresented on arts and cultural boards. So that has included young people, First Nations, deaf and disabled, regional and remote, and also those from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So we've really been prioritising those who are aspirant board members from those groups, wanting to build their capability and thinking about how we can support them into a company director role that's also included opportunities for kind of coaching or mentorship post their kind of formal training. So a really important area of priority, and thank you for that question.
I'm now going to hand over, and thanks so much to Adam, but I've just noticed the time. I'm time checking myself. I'm now going to hand over to Vicki Middleton. Vicki has a wealth of experience in this space, and so I thought it would be great to bring in, the perspective of the amazing research that Creative Australia has done and the work that Adam and his team has done. And then also to bring in someone who's been working on the ground with a lot of boards over, quite a long period of time. So handing over to you, Vicki.
Thank you, Beck. Thanks, Adam. I just need to share screen. My window, that one, and then play from start. So have you got that?
Yes, we got it. We got it.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Lovely to be here. Lovely to see so many familiar and new names coming into this session. I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I'm on beautiful Camaragal country. This is the Lane Cove River that is near where I have the pleasure of working and living. And I pay my respects to all First Nations people, past, present, and emerging. I am a white woman in my 50s. I've got long brown hair, wearing glasses intermittently, depending on what I'm looking at, with orange cardigan and black top, and my pronouns are she, her. So thanks for the intro, Beck. Yeah, I'm really drawing from my own experience today on what I've learned along the way. I've been a general manager, executive director of companies, so managed boards. I've been a board member and a chair of a board. I've also been an arts management consultant for the last 16 years. So I've worked with a lot of organisations and their boards to try and help them be as efficient as possible. So I come at it from all kind of angles. I noted Beck used the word at the beginning, there has been a lot of discourse over boards and some of the controversies that have happened over the last few years that we're all really aware of. And I think, there have been some examples of poor governance. I also think as a sector, we have to be ever so slightly careful, because sometimes it's really easy to just blame the board if we don't know absolutely everything that's happened. You know what they say, you don't know till you know and you're on the inside. And like I say, there are examples of governance that have left organisations worse off. There was a study, I'd recommend you look it up, by Kate Larson, who I think it was 23 or 24, who did a study on boards and did some really interesting work. And she discovered through a survey that 50% of board members lack a clear understanding or have a lack of understanding or ability to speak about a company on the behalf of their organisations that they're on board members for, which isn't great. But we also have to remember it's complex and it's difficult. So I think, when it works so well, and a board, a voluntary board, can add such immense value to an organisation. So, how do we make sure we're there, I think, is the really important thing that I want to talk about today. And I also think we, of course, talk about publicly the bad boards. We, of course, don't celebrate the good boards. And perhaps that would bring some balance into the conversation. So I was thinking of what are those examples, and I was thinking about Griffin. Now, I'm not in Griffin. I haven't talked to anyone from Griffin Theatre for a while. So, but looking from the outside, that massive redevelopment they're just going through, you couldn't do that without a board driving the fundraising and the lobbying, etc. So, that's really exciting. I think about when I was running Belvoir Street Theatre, when I came in, the first board meeting, the board said, we want you to go off and programme a commercial season of Keating, which, for those of you that are younger, was a really hugely successful show 18 years ago. And that board, I don't think I would have had the guts to have done that on my own, because that's a risk, right? That board had the the sense to give me permission as executive director to do that. It was so successful. I then booked that show for 2 years, literally a 2-year tour, and that made enormous amounts of money for the company and helped the company in so many different ways, the artists, etc. And so that was a really good example of good governance, working together and understanding the organisation. So I'm going to talk to you about what I think a healthy board should look like, what we can do as company leaders to work with our boards to make them most efficient, and what we should expect from them to do that as well as trying to do a bit of demystifying, because we can get all quite overwhelmed by this stuff. Let's face it, we do this job because we want to make great art. So when we get into board conversations, our eyes can mist over, but it's so critical and it can work so well. And of course, the other thing, I'm aware that there possibly might be people on here who come from venues who don't have not-for-profit boards, but have council kind of boards or advisory board made up of councillors. And that's another whole different thing. And sometimes I know from working with companies that can be really, really difficult, because you're with a bunch of councillors who either don't support the arts or don't get the arts or don't get the value of the arts, like we all know. Look, I think you can apply some of the things that I talk about today and some of the things that Adam's talked about still to those organisations to bring them along for the ride. Just really quickly, I think we all know what fit for purpose work means, but I just want to sort of, I was like, what does it say on Google that actually means, or the dictionary? And it says suitable and good enough to do what it is intended to do. I like to think with our boards, we could work a bit beyond suitable and good enough. It kind of sounds a bit mediocre. I think we can strive for excellence, and we do as arts organisations. So when I use that phrase, they fit for purpose, I'd like to think it's not just like, yeah, we'll do, that we can do better. So Adam touched upon board culture, and I want to touch upon that as well as in these next few set of slides, kind of good efficiencies and communications and responsibilities as well. So one of the first things that utterly amazes me, even to this day, is how often I go into companies with my consulting hat on and see that there is such a lack of clarity on the responsibilities between the executive team and the board of whose job it is to do what. Often even quite sort of middle scale organisations, and this is why Creative Australia and Adam set the hub up, I'm sure. There's just like no paperwork outside of the constitution, which doesn't really go into the detail of, that's more about how many members and how often do you meet and what about the voting rights, but the actual more kind of operational side of a board. And if you haven't got the paperwork, it's really hard for the board to hold the management to account and vice versa, or work together. So how do you know what to do if you haven't got that? And also the other thing is, a lot of board members come on with very limited kind of board inductions, and some of them are put in place because they've got lawyers skills as a lawyer or a treasurer, a finance person. And our industry is so very bespoke. Obviously, it is also their responsibility to learn. I am not putting all this on the managers at all, but we can take each other along for the ride to upskill all of us and upskill the knowledge we have collectively. I think the best way to do that is a really simple, I noticed it was on the hub, a really simple board charter. I'm going to flash a board charter up in front of you. I'm not stopping on it because it's something you can look at later, and I only have 15 to 20 minutes. But I just like, you've got the example now. Prior to the Creative Australia website, you could go online, download one and adapt it as your own as a starting point, and then, adapt it over time. But you can see I've blocked out the numbers here, but, we've got the purpose, the overview there, the mission, vision, values of the organisation. What is the purpose of the board? What are their key responsibilities? And these ones that were for this board were a pretty kind of common across the sector. Obviously, this has been recorded, so you can look at these again a bit later if you needed to. But memberships and terms, commitments, I'll talk about that a bit as well separately. But really just going through that and making that clear. I think one thing I would say in terms of commitment and expectations is that the bit that doesn't often always get talked about is that it's not just your responsibility as the management to write these. The board should be working on these with you as well. And I think that's really, really critical. So moving through that, you can see the roles of each person, what they should do, the role of the company secretary, their tenure, which I'll touch upon in a minute, the board culture, you know, how they bring themselves to the meeting. So that gives you sorry it's so quick, but it shows that you can make those documents quite quickly, and they're all out there for us, which makes it really, really simple and quick. Communications. This is obviously, you know, down to make sure you send your papers out in a timely way, be prepared for meetings, have monthly coffees with the chair, right through to ensuring that the board members and the management are ongoingly communicating with clarity and purpose and in a healthy way. It's so important, and leading into that is the relationship with the chair. Look, when boards go bad, that sounds like a good reality TV show, doesn't it? When boards go bad. I'm sure there'd be a lot of content for that, but this sits at the crux of it for me, that I've seen a lot, not always, but I have seen a lot when the relationship between the management or the ED and the relationship with the chair breaks down. That can be a real problem. That's why it's good to have a deputy chair position as well, not just for succession planning, so that there is another level if there is a massive problem, because, you know, it's that weird relationship that they line manage you, but you also manage the board. So it's a kind of, you know, it's that strange kind of position. Setting the culture. You know, making sure there is positively healthy tones in those board meetings. That is all down to that chair who runs those meetings. Making sure the board members live by the values of the board and making decisions through those values. I remember on one board I was on, having this ridiculously overlong conversation about, should we put ticket prices up? And the board at the time, the company at the time, it was really undercharging and costs were going up, and it just had to happen. And the artistic team were really reluctant because of access and inclusion policies. But one of the board members turned around and said, hang on, we've got 3 values and one of them is courage. So should we just have the courage to do it and see what happens? And it was really like, oh. And then all the debate stopped and we went, yeah, let's do that then. So we really were living by our values and making decisions through our values. A really quick example of a beautiful company I work with, Murrumbilla Voices. They do a lot of work regionally, on country, with First Nations knowledge holders and artists. They take their board every year on a cultural immersion weekend on country, led by knowledge holders. They bond. They get to understand the real context of the work and the real what the company are doing on the coalface. So, you know, that has made that board so positive and efficient. So that's a really good example. Adam touched upon this, skills and representation. I feel deeply passionate about this. It's a 20-minute subject more in its own. So sorry to just, you know, really skip over this. I'm with intelligent people in the room who run arts organisations, so we know the criticality of why the board at the top of our decision-making power should have diversity, so that we're making decisions based on the a range of lived experiences and diverse cultures, and representing, you know, Australia, which is I think 51% of Australians have a parent or are born overseas, a parent born overseas or are born overseas. So we know we're an incredibly diverse nation. Also, youth came up. Yes, absolutely. If it's right for you, you should have a youth representative. Belvoir had a staff representative on their board, and that was really good. It was actually Brenna Hobson years ago, before my time, who apparently said, when they were developing Belvoir, why don't we buy the warehouse on the corner? It's up for sale, as the staff representative on the board. And that is now the offices and the rehearsal space. So, you know, there's a huge contribution to make. I do want to make a point. I did look up the stats. I have looked up the stats before. Across the board of Australia's top companies, this is horrific. 64% are men. 9% of board members are culturally and linguistically diverse, and 0.003% are Indigenous, which is awful. But again, that's not arts company stats, that's out there in the world stats. And so I just, bringing First Nations people on board in Australia is critical, but don't overload those people. Don't give those people off in those situations, then feel they've got the whole cultural load, and it's still the rest of the board's responsibility to have awareness. Look, I do these board matrix with companies that I work on. I see there's something on the portal as well, so I'm sure there's amazing examples too. So these are self-evaluated board matrices that I do with companies I work with. I give them a very clear guide of how they assess their things. I always say, please, people, be aware that men overinflate their skills and women underestimate their skills. Sorry, men, I'm not trying to be mean. That's just a general sweeping generalization. That's what happens. I'm seeing the time and I've got to rush, keep moving through fast. Share the successes with the board. That's really important. Tell them the good stuff. Don't just tell it to the staff. You know, that's critical. Terms, make sure people don't hang on for too long. You need board renewal. Make sure the terms, if you want people to stay on because they're brilliant, great. Don't use great members. But if you need to get rid of people, terms are a great way to do that. If there's a toxicity in the board, it's a great way to do that. And it's a great way to, as we try and increase the representation of our boards, sort of say, you need to move over. Transparency, honesty, do not hide things from your board as a manager, and knowing the boundaries, really having a clear set of communications about whose job is what. And that goes back to, you know, what you can do an exercise at a strategic planning day or on a board meeting about what's the board's responsibilities versus the executive director's responsibilities if you need to. Also, something that came to my mind is, which isn't in here, is making sure you vet and interview new board members. Call references. You would do it for a staff member, do it for a board member, because the wrong person there can be quite influential and potentially toxic and potentially brilliant as well, of course. Board evaluation. I know it's a voluntary, like these people are voluntary. I've done that from my side as well, and many of you probably do. But we should be evaluating the boards. We should be evaluating what is good practice, how checking in every year, how we're running. It's really important. So just some really quick things now before I wind up about expectations of a good board member. And some of you, if you're not on boards now, I'm sure as arts leaders you will be on boards in the future. So think about these things as well for yourself to be a good board member in the future or now. Turn up and be accountable. Read the frigging papers. Oh my God, people that don't read their board papers, they should be called out to account. Like staff spend a lot of time preparing them, and the idea of if they're done well, it cuts out a lot of conversations so that during board meetings, you're actually talking about issues that you need to talk about and debating them rather than just informing the board of what's been going on. So that's really important. Ask the hard questions. A board one year who I really can't name was, this is before my time even in Australia, over 20 years ago, the general manager was embezzled $250,000, and during board meetings was presenting false accounts. There was one particular board member who's an industry leader today, who's an awesome person, who kept asking and asking and asking. This person would end up crying in board meetings, and the rest of the board would go, oh, don't be mean to that person. And had they let that the person I'm talking about really dived deep into it, perhaps it wouldn't have happened. So you've got to ask the hard questions. Don't wait to be asked to do things. Don't, as in your board shouldn't have to wait to be asked things. Sorry, that didn't come out quite right, but you know what I'm saying. If you are a board member, and making sure your board members commit to their commitment. I think one of the most important things is in your board charter is to set expectations. The most thing is to say to them, outside of board meetings and coming to opening night events, which should be a must, and perhaps an annual strategic planning days, how many hours a month are you going to spend voluntary on this company? I always landed at about 4 hours a month. So then it's like, again, you can literally say, have you done it? Well, you wouldn't say, have you done it 4 hours a month? But you can call people on it and say, and if they don't want to, you can say, oh, well, that's the commitment of the board. Be a good advocate, be a good lobbyist. One of the best things you can do is just go out there and talk up amazing things about your organisation. 2 more minutes, Beck. Bring your sector knowledge, of course, and support and guide and lead always sounds really, is obvious. Just my last slide. Don't be an interfering vicar. This is a story about when we were touring back in the day in Cornwall, in a little church hall when we were just starting out, but doing a show about club culture with a very, very loud soundtrack. And the vicar of the church hall, who was very enthusiastic, sat next to us in the lighting box, and I was doing the sound because I had to do everything back in the day. And he kept coming in and going, oh, that's a bit loud, and turning down the volume. So with Frantic Assembly, we used to say, don't be an interfering vicar, as in don't overstep your mark, and don't let the board members overstep their mark. This is kind of one for if you're a board member. Make sure you remunerate staff properly. They are your greatest asset. Try and encourage your board to do the same. It shouldn't be that you work out all your expenses and then pay whatever's less for your team. So put that money aside first. And I think that is a very important thing for a board. Again, I won't name names, but I found out a client of mine, their ED has not been paid properly for years, and I was so furious. I really thought about writing to their chair, and I still might say, that's not good enough. That's on you as a board member. Directors insurance. Make sure your board knows that it's not a get out of jail free card. If they do something wrong, they're still responsible. Donate. That might be your time. Not everybody can donate money. I won't go into conflicts of interest. That stuff from that is on the portal. Make the table bigger or get out of your seat. This is about that representation thing. Make sure the board members, if you need to increase representation in your board, then get out. I do not buy into culturally diverse board placements being there because of their diversity. It's almost insulting. If you need a lawyer, great, go and get a First Nations lawyer, or a cold treasurer. I think it's patronising and rude. There are amazing people out there. Because of these stats, they're harder to find, but go find them. And that last one, replace yourself. It's more if you're a board member. If you're leaving, try and replace yourself. And just my very last thing is, I think one of the most critical things of all is to make sure you have a balance of arts and non-arts people on your board, because the arts people can help the non-arts people navigate the arts world and just help you as a manager cut down some of the conversations that are sometimes just a bit silly because people might not have that knowledge. So I've talked too much, sorry, but I will stop sharing. I'm so sorry, it's 1:02, but
don't apologise, Vicki. That's fabulous. Now we don't have any questions in the chat, I expect, because it's been so great. If anyone wants to put their hand up and ask a question, please do so. I've got some nice positive feedback coming into the chat now, but we did cover a lot of territory here today. It is a big place to get into. but it's also a really, it's a place where a lot of people have knowledge, like Vicki, and, you know, there is research and support all over the place to guide you, but it's so fantastic that we have the researchers at Creative Australia that are able to bring, you know, arts relevant kind of information into the space. And Ali has dropped into that chat saying, conversely, if you have First Nations or culturally diverse board members, have the direct conversation about shared expectations of them advising from their lived experience, as well as the cultural and colonial load. Thanks, Ali. But yeah, I'd like to read your board papers, yes. I would really like to thank Vicki and thank Adam for sharing in this fast-paced webinar such a lot of great information. We will be uploading this to our website. I have dropped Adam's links into the chat, but we'll also make sure that we can find a space to put them also on the website so that you can connect through to those too at your leisure. Thank you so much.